Can the UK really reach net zero while still drilling for oil in the North Sea? That's the big question. On paper, the UK has one of the most ambitious climate targets in the world, a legally binding promise to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But in reality, things look a lot more complicated. One moment, the government is talking tough about cutting fossil fuels and leading the world on climate action. The next moment, it's approving new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea. And voters are left wondering, is this about saving the planet or saving political careers? In this video, we'll break down the UK's energy dilemma, why net zero is so politically messy, how oil and gas fits into the picture, and whether the country can actually keep its promises. So what exactly is net zero? It means that by 2050, the UK must cut greenhouse gas emissions as close to zero as possible and offset whatever is left through measures like carbon capture, reforestation, or new technologies. Back in 2019, the UK made headlines as the first major economy in the world to put net zero into law. It was a bold move meant to position Britain as a climate leader. But since then, the path has been, well, less straightforward. Deadlines for banning petrol and diesel cars, phasing out gas boilers, and cutting emissions in sectors like aviation and agriculture have all been pushed back or softened. And every time a date shifts, critics say the government is kicking the can down the road. Supporters argue the changes are about realism, balancing climate goals with the economy and cost of living. But the bigger issue remains. If the UK keeps moving the goalposts, can it still claim to be on track for net zero? To understand the UK's energy dilemma, we need to look at the North Sea. For decades, North Sea oil and gas were a backbone of the British economy. In the 1980s, they brought in billions in revenue and supported hundreds of thousands of jobs, especially in Scotland. But production peaked around the year 2000, and since then, it's been in steady decline. Today, the UK still relies on the North Sea for a chunk of its energy, but much less than before. Here's the problem. Drilling new wells means investing in fossil fuels, just when the UK is supposed to be phasing them out. Critics say, approving new licenses locks the country into decades of emissions. Supporters argue it's about energy security. Why depend on imports from places like Qatar or Russia when you can produce your own? And that's where the controversy comes in. In some years, the government talks about ending new oil and gas licenses altogether. Then, after public pressure about rising energy bills or job losses, it suddenly announces dozens of new ones. It's a cycle of promises and reversals that leaves people confused and skeptical. And of course, this is where politics gets involved. The Conservative government frames oil and gas as a question of security and pragmatism. They argue Britain needs domestic production during the transition to renewables. Otherwise, households risk higher bills and blackouts. Labour, on the other hand, has pledged to stop issuing new licenses if it comes to power. But even they have softened the message, saying existing fields would keep producing for years. In other words, no overnight shutdown. Smaller parties like the Greens and the Liberal Democrats want a faster phase-out, arguing the UK can't lead on climate while still expanding fossil fuel projects. And then there's public opinion. Polls show most people support net zero in principle. But when it comes to paying higher energy bills or replacing their gas boiler with a heat pump, enthusiasm drops quickly. So net zero has become a political football, used to rally voters, attack opponents, and score points. But the actual path forward, that remains uncertain. At the heart of this debate are jobs and communities. The oil and gas industry still supports tens of thousands of workers, particularly in Scotland's northeast, around Aberdeen. For many families, this isn't just an industry, it's a way of life. So when politicians talk about shutting down new drilling, workers hear one thing: job losses. The government insists it's investing in a just transition, moving workers into offshore wind, hydrogen, and carbon capture projects. And yes, the UK has huge potential in renewables. Offshore wind alone already powers millions of homes. But the reality is, transitions aren't that simple. You can't always take a drilling engineer and plug them straight into a wind farm job. Skills, training, and geography all matter. And then there's the question of cost. Moving too fast may mean higher energy prices and economic disruption. Moving too slow risks falling behind in the global race for green industries. It's a balancing act, and right now the UK is wobbling in the middle. On the world stage, the UK loves to present itself as a climate leader. Remember COP26 in Glasgow? Britain was at the center, urging other countries to phase out coal and accelerate renewable energy. But here's the awkward truth. Every time the UK approves more oil and gas drilling, critics say it's undermining its own credibility. How can you tell the world to quit fossil fuels while opening new oil fields at home? International comparisons make it even more complicated. The European Union has generally taken a tougher stance on fossil fuels, pushing harder for clean energy. Meanwhile, the United States is expanding oil production to record levels. So, Britain is stuck in the middle, trying to look green, but also trying to keep the lights on. And that raises the bigger question. Can the UK actually reach net zero while still depending on oil and gas? Supporters of new drilling say yes. They argue domestic oil is cleaner than imports, and the country will still need fossil fuels during the transition. Better to produce them at home than buy them abroad. But climate experts warn that expanding oil and gas now locks Britain into decades of emissions and risks overshooting the very targets it promised the world. It's a classic dilemma. Move too fast, and you risk job losses, higher bills, and political backlash. Move too slow, and you risk climate failure and a damaged global reputation. Right now, the UK is trying to walk that tightrope. But the rope is fraying, and sooner or later, the country will have to make a clear choice. So here's the truth. The UK's path to net zero is anything but straightforward. On one side, there's the urgent need to cut emissions and lead the fight against climate change. On the other, the reality of jobs, bills, and energy security, all tied to oil and gas. It's a balancing act that keeps shifting with every new policy announcement, every election, and every spike in global energy prices. The real question is this: should Britain double down on renewables and ditch North Sea oil, or take a slower, more cautious transition? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Where do you stand on the UK's energy dilemma? And if you found this video useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dives into energy, politics, and the future of our planet.